Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa marhaba. Bonjour et bienvenue. Welcome to this interview for the Open Borders Institute. We are a small advocacy with the goal of changing perspectives on cross-border exchanges. This week, we welcome Francesca Romana d'Antuono. Francesca Romana is co-president of Volt Europa. She is a political entrepreneur who pioneers new forms of democracy through broader engagement and a grassroots functioning. Hello, Francesca Romana.
Hello, Adam. Hello, everybody who's listening. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Um, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So, you're an Italian who's living in Berlin. You've also lived in Switzerland. You are co-presiding a party that is covering not only countries within the European Union, but also the United Kingdom, for instance, which is one of the countries that is outside of the EU that you're also covering. Um, and you're also someone who used to work on overlooking Eastern Europe during your work in the pharmaceutical industry. So, to sum up, you're someone who's had an engagement with the wider world, and that's something that we try to promote at the Open Borders Institute. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your desire to encounter people from other countries, to move maybe abroad, to raise a child in a different country? Uh, Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first off, again, thanks for having me. As you mentioned, I am Italian but living in Berlin. And I've been residing here, I think now it's out of 2 or 3 years. And I first moved because I took a job here where I was overlooking the business that my company had in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So my identity, I think, as a lot of millennials, let's say in my bubble, is really one that has multiple layers. I come from south of Italy, which for me is a super strong identity because I mean, probably you know that we have a big divide within South and North Europe. But also the identity as an Italian is super important for me, and of course the one as European. This has been developing for me in the course of many years, having the luck and also the luxury to travel around a lot, to be educated in different parts of this continent, to have international friends and be able to exchange views. So this, let's say, the international and European, especially European identity, has been very strong with me. This has been part, I think, of the reason why I became active in a pan-European party. So Volt Europa was founded in 2018, and at the time, I was living in Italy at the time, and a new government took place that year. And that government was formed by a populistic party, the Five Star Movement, and a far-right party, the League. So what happened was that they formed this government, and I've always been a progressive, and I'm immediately, as many others, very shocked. So my immediate reaction was to look at what was happening in Europe, because usually, the Berlusconi era ended because Europe took a strong stance in somehow. Okay, not only for that, but it did play the role. And what I saw was that actually the situation was not at all better. The far right was emerging a lot in France. Brexit had happened. Also, there were all sorts of scary movements inside what I consider, the way for us as Italians to come, not to be saved, but at least to exit this weird situation. And so, that's the moment where you realize that there is no one coming to save you, but you better prepare and save yourself. So it made a lot of sense for me to enter a pan-European party, because I knew that there was a community, let's say, that shared my same identity. So the fact that, yes, you can be Italian in my case, also from a specific region, but also feel deeply European and interconnected with the rest with the rest of the continent. Then when I moved here, as you mentioned, I have a small child, is 13 months now. And his dad is originally Albanian. So he's also Italian, but he's also Albanian. So I found myself with this little Italian Albanian born in Germany. And I realized like he was really a product, you know, of all this interconnection and exchanges. And I found also myself wondering what he will actually consider his identity, what will be for him the place that he considers he belongs to. Of course, that depends where he grows up, but it also depends on how, like he's, you know, yeah, very young and already experiencing various languages, various experiences. So I'm sure that his identity will be even different from mine, but very much international. And I really like that you mentioned the fact that Volta Europa is not focused on exclusively the EU. So one of our main goals is really to reform the EU. I hope we can have the time to deep dive a bit on this. But the point is that the EU is not something created to exclude others. You know, we're not the kind of the new conservatives. They'll be like, you know, the EU is oh well, you know about this. The EU is a garden that needs to be safeguarded from the jungle. Not at all. We believe that the EU is actually something that needs to be shared. So in our organization, we also have a party in the UK, as you mentioned, but also in Albania, in Switzerland, and in Ukraine very recently, because we believe that the prosperity is either shared or doesn't really make sense in a world as interconnected as ours.
Wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit about your personal experience moving to Germany? What was it like as an Italian?
Yeah, so this is something interesting because I found myself discussing this with various people. I think I have, again, the luxury and the luck to belong to that part of the population that when migrates, calls themselves an expat and not a migrant. And the difference is subtle, but it's huge. I realized, you know, maybe talking with also other people, that I always felt very entitled to be here. I came with a very stable, very nice job. There was no question for me that I perfectly suit into the society. I perfectly belong into the society. Of course, there are differences, right? I mean, this is Germany, and I was coming from Italy, but at the same time, it felt very natural. Especially, I think this is also part of the fact that, of course, I live in Berlin, so it's a very international city, very welcoming. Nobody really cares of you know who you are or where you come from. But I also experienced this as some kind of privilege that I have to recognize is not necessarily their experience of everybody. I'll give you one example. I am ashamed to admit that I still don't speak German because I moved here for my job that only required me to speak English. And my community of friends is completely international. So we only speak English among us. So the reasons for me to learn Germany were very little. You can really live in English in Berlin, but I know that this is not always the case. So I want to acknowledge that my experience here moving has been one of a person who has a privilege that depends on the kind of bubble you grow up in and the kind of international outlook you have. But I wouldn't say this is what happens to no matter who comes here from maybe other country. There's also a question of, and this, you know, I think it's something that in Europe we're really starting to have a problem with. This also depends from the fact that I come from another strong economy. When people come here from weaker economy, they're looked down a lot, and not just in Germany. This is something that I've seen happen a lot in Europe. So I've adapted good. I think this is a very positive experience, but I also want to acknowledge that, again, I don't consider this being the common experience necessarily.
And what is it like to be an Italian in a party? It seems from the outside, but I could be wrong, that at its start had a rather Dutch and German leadership. How does that work? Is there
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I think your impression is correct. I wouldn't frame this as a topic of the leadership because it is true that the previous co-president, she was German, and my co-president was still in office. So it is true, yes, that the leadership was Dutch and German, but in general, I think, Volt was founded by a German, an Italian, and a French person. So we really started with a variety of people. What is interesting to me is that the dominance of Germany and the Netherlands, which are somehow still there because our biggest members come from these communities, our biggest share of members come from this community. What is interesting to me is that honestly, this only proves the point of a need of a pan-European party and of a deep reform of the EU. Sometimes mute because I need to cough because I'm a bit sick, but I'm still here. So what I was saying is that somehow this dominance proves the point of the need of a more integrated EU, because the big membership that we have in these two countries is the direct product of the very good work done by our volunteers on the field, but also from the fact that the Dutch and the German political systems are way more welcoming to new parties. So let's take an example, right? If you want to run for elections in France, the rules to be able to run make it so that you really have to invest a huge amount of money. Like we calculated for the European elections, if you want to run in France, upfront you need to spend 2 million euros, like upfront, So of course, this only favors parties who have big personalities who are already established. In Italy, it's the same. So in Italy, it's not about money to be spent upfront, but the democratic rules to participate are so complex that they make it impossible for a small party to participate unless you attach yourself to some big personality. But then if you do so, your party is not new. You don't empower new energies. You're just following someone who's already there. In the German and Dutch system, luckily, this is not necessarily true. So they have systems that are more democratic and that enables new parties, new people, fresh energies to enter. And this generates a positive effect, right? Because if a new kid comes on the block, like Volt did in 2021, when we won, for example, the parliamentarian seats in 2020, no, 2021, the parliamentarian seats in the Netherlands. This, of course, means that all of a sudden you win seats, you are in the news, you have more money, so people know about you and your membership grows. So I would say this is about the political systems that we have around Europe. Then what is it, the experience for me? I honestly think that this is the magic a bit that Volt is putting in place, because our idea is really to bring not the member states together, but the citizens together. So your nationality, when you are involved, matters up until a certain point. It matters because you're more likely to work with your national team and so to have different challenges. There are, of course, cultural differences, like it would be naive to say that this is not, but our idea is to really bring people together. So I think I face challenges as Francesca more than as Francesca the Italian. You know what I mean?
Of course, of course. And speaking about your political party and about the elections in 2021, uh, we're now in 2022, and you had your General Assembly. And through that, you've kind of pioneered a way of envisioning a political program which is co-created by your members, which is something that's very interesting. Also, in this idea of creating a public sphere in the EU, but even beyond, as you've said. And one of these policies, which you've framed because you've talked about the fact that you're also present in Ukraine, one of those components is the defense community. And so Lucas here has a question which is specific about one of the topics that is very typical of old political parties, and that is arms trade. And as a new political party, you kind of have to deal with those dirty, let's say, issues that other political parties have to deal with, the kind of realpolitik of European defense. And so we're kind of interested at an Open Borders Institute to see how you can bring new blood, new energy to such old questions where, frankly, there's not necessarily that much new thinking going on. Lucas?
Yeah, I mean, as Adam really said, there are a lot of discussions about the Common European Defense, which were held at the General Assembly of Volt Europa in Prague. An article was published by Paul von Bommel from the Volt Party, making the argument that the EU needs to research, develop, and procure weapons together by jointly replenishing EU-built weapon system, with the aim of delivering weapons aimed at defeating despots. So there are discussions about joint European procurement, but there does not seem to be any discussions about joint European arms exports, while the EU hosts the biggest international arms exporting countries, such as France, Italy, Spain, and Germany, who are all four countries are in the top 10. So how do you consider the future of the common European defense in that regard? Would you be in favor of developing joint European arms exports?
Thanks for asking this question. So one disclaimer, this is not my field of expertise. I'm happy to reply, but you probably would have more interesting conversations with people who really work on this. But I do have my perspective that I want to share. So common European defense, as you said, there are discussions about this. There seem to have some movements, then they go to a halt, then yeah, in my view, the projects are not ambitious enough, and most of all, they don't reply to the most important question, which is the governance that this common European defense would have. How do we do it without creating another monster? And I want to use this strong word, such as Frontex. Frontex per se is a good thing. We need to have someone who looks at the border. But the governance is so intransparent that they have been able to do unspeakable things with the money and in the name of the EU. So what you don't want to repeat is that same mess where the governance isn't clear, especially with something so delicate as the European defense.
That was a difficult question. What we see with Volt Europa is that this is a concept that one of our previous guests, Alberto Alemano, was using. He was comparing, and he did that in one of our videos, old power, contrasting old power with new power. And so what I'm kind of thinking is, you're bringing fresh solutions to old problems. The question of European integration, the question of a European political community with what you're doing by integrating countries who are not in the EU within Volt Europa is a very old question. It's been brought up this year by President Emmanuel Macron, but that's an idea that is as old as Europe. And so I'm thinking about, how do you see the future of European politics with these new ideas that you're bringing, this new perspective, a fairly young leadership as well?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question, if you know what I mean. But it is at the core of what we're doing. So I was laughing a bit the other day. I was reading this article in Politico, I think, that reports of an academic study that proves scientifically that the European Union as it is just not understandable. So the regular person just doesn't understand it. And I think it's very fair because it's very complex, bureaucratic, somehow intransparent. So what I think the problem lays is that we sometimes speak of the European Union as if it was one democracy, as if it was one united institute that had, as you know, sometimes we look at the French government and you replicate that looking at Europe, but it's not at all like this, right? The European Union is still a very much bureaucratic system that has, in my view, during COVID, it has made some real advancements when it comes to political stances, which I welcome very much. But what has not happened is that at the same time, there have been profound and much needed governance reforms so that this new political identity of the EU can really emerge. So we mentioned the GA of Volta Europa, the General Assembly of Volta Europa in Prague, right? So when we were there, for example, a few days before, or even when we were there, a few days before the last day, so we really coincided with them, the new European political community deeply wanted by Macron reunited. And that included also countries outside what is now the EU. But the point is that if you don't give these communities body real power to act, they remain empty body, very distant from what citizens want. And then to me, it's no surprise that we see the far right rising. If the EU is not understandable, cannot enact, but it's just being depicted as some cold office in Brussels that tells you what to do, it's really no surprise. But at the moment, a very, very profound rethinking of the EU governance is needed. And this is what we're trying to do, right? So the strategic idea behind Volt is, as you were saying, to create a community of citizens, first of all, but also in terms of strategic goal, when it comes to the European election, our aim would be to elect people in 7 different countries so that we're able to create our own fraction. And when you have your own fraction, one party, you can really push for reform from the inside. We already started to doing, there was a proposal being voted this year about new rules for the European parliamentary elections, which at the moment make no sense because every member state elects people the way they want, and then they sit in the same chamber with the same powers. So it was, we're already really pushing for this and achieving some results. But of course, the moment you're able to have one party that is represented across country, then of course you can really start to go at the core of the problems and create solutions, not only in terms of, how do we see this, but enabling the implementation of this solution. At the moment, we have a lot of goodwill, but then every member state, honestly, is just interested in what happens in their territory, unless something big happens, such as the war, such as COVID. But they're willing to give very little because they're bounded to no system,
And something that I very much like about Volt Europa is your focus at Europe, but also the fact that you look beyond. And even being what some could call quite federalist, at the European level, I still think Europe is within the world is still a small place. I mean, it's millions of inhabitants, but compared to the rest of the world, only looking at Europe, having an Eurocentric point of view is not necessarily the solution. And during your General Assembly, you've raised 3-4 points that were particularly important for you. You had the priorities of the people who have voted. You had your own priorities. Within your own priorities, you've mentioned the rule of law and democracy. We're going to come back to this point. And then there was also a 4th point that you said you would, want to scoop around with this notion, and it would be a common migration policy. We're going to speak about the EU and the migration policy. But first of all, I wanted to speak about a country that's not in the EU anymore with regards to that. And so you've mentioned to me when we were discussing your husband is Italian. of Albanian descent. And right now in the UK, there's been anger from the Albanian community at Suella Braverman, who's the Home Secretary in the United Kingdom, based on her accusations and her portrayal of the Albanians who had been protesting at the characterization of their community in political statements. I'm not asking you as the co-president of Volt. I'm asking you as a person and as someone who's a partner with someone of Albanian descent. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, so it's thanks for asking me also, because I think I mentioned when we spoke offline. So for those who are listening, this was I don't think it was mentioned here, but I mentioned to you that to me what is personal is also political. So I'm very happy that you asked this question. So I think this is the characterizations of communities to demonize them, to disenfranchise them, to put them in a corner is something with which we have a problem all around the world in general, right? Narration sometimes matters more than data. And this to me is a political battle that I want to fight. I come from a country at the moment, which then we're going to speak about migration. I'm happy about this, but I come from a country that has now elected a truly neo-fascist government. I mean, we can call them another name, but that's just what they are. And I've been listening for the past 5 years, numbers of interviews given by either these people or people in their political area, telling stories about, how, for example, African migrants come and then they commit crimes, etc. And then you look at data and there's nothing like that. There's literally nothing like that. This doesn't mean that every African person that comes to Italy is a good person. It's just that the crime is not linked to a community. It's most of all linked either to wealth. So poor people in need, of course, tend to commit more crime, but there's nothing to do with ethnicity. And so this has been, for example, very true in Italy now with African migrants. But when I was young, it was true for Albanian, because the communists fell when I think I was 9 or something, or 8 maybe, and then the common enemy in Italy was all these Albanian coming, and you don't know what they do, and the public discourse was very much filled with hate. Now this is not over, not in Italy and not elsewhere. And in some countries, in some countries and everywhere, my point is that narration is not something that we just tell to each other, but it's something that then shape politics. So I was making the example of Italy because then these people who have created this imaginary migrant crisis, is not like we don't have a lot of refugees coming, but there's no migrant crisis. First of all, because a lot of these people are refugees, not migrants. And second of all, because crisis is something that happens and go away. What we're seeing is very different. The same happens in other places. And what happens when the hate narration wins is that the system adapts to it. So specifically about the UK with the Albanian community, I'm following, and I recommend to everybody listening, this amazing scholar who's an Albanian living in the UK. She's called Lea Ypi. She published her book. Yeah, I'm happy you know what I'm talking about. And she published her book this year. It's called Freedom. It's an amazing book, and it tells the story of what happens after communist falls in Albania. And she recently published on Twitter screenshots of her mom's rejection to get a visa to enter the country. That is very revealing to me, because the way it is written, it becomes very personal. So the person who writes feels entitled to discriminate against someone they probably haven't really met, and assume that, everybody wants to come to the UK and, I don't know, steal your money, steal your jobs, or whatever that is. So from something that is just narration, you really originate true political problems. You really originate systems that are systematically exclusionary of certain categories. This has happened in the UK with Albanians. So to be frank, I very much support this protest. I very much support people standing up and saying you cannot label a whole people, you know, with your label. That's systematic discrimination.
Thank you very much. We're going to continue on this issue of migration. Oyan?
Do you think that the EU, in particular with the new conditionality mechanism, has sufficient means to safeguard the rule of law? And what would you propose to reinforce democracy?
Thanks a million. These are the topics that I really care about, and parts of the reasons why I became active in politics. So this interview feels very personal to me. I want to thank you for that. It doesn't always happen. I love it. The conditionality mechanism. So I mean, this is not the first time the EU tries, the European Commission tries something like this, right? And I'm of course grateful that there is the research for some kind of mechanisms that enable us to have more, not control, because that is also different, but I'm back. Some mechanism that is able to make sure that European contributors' money is not spent to increase the power of despots or non-democratic parties or governments or organizations. I'm unfortunately not very positive about it. There has been an interesting study from, I think, 2017 that was examining the conditionality mechanisms of the EU and found what were its successes, because you cannot say that there are zero successes, but also its flaws. And to me, the main flaw is that the conditionality mechanism is based on one single point, right? So okay, let's take a concrete example. We have Fidesz in Hungary, who is really playing poker with the EU and with its money. What has happened in the course of the years is that the Commission has linked funds, for example, funds deployment to the country, to one single point. But the system that Orban has built at home is not about one single point. So it's not only about women's rights, LGBTIQ plus rights. It's not only about reproductive rights. It's a system. It's a full system that enables him to stay in power. So if the conditionality is linked to, for example, just one point, it's very easy in a system built like this to refocus. They can abolish that law that is being tackled, whatever, but the system still stays in place and still push for more and more undemocratic government to stay in power. When you think about it, the last Hungarian elections were really an example of what is happening in the country. So the opposition created a huge coalition that went from left parties to center-right parties. Inside it, there were like parties that are like religious and others that are complete atheists. It was really big because there was a need for really putting some power against what Fidesz is doing. And what happens is that the opposition loses. So everybody's like, oh my God, so Hungarians really want Orban. But when you look at what has happened, the opposition had during the campaign, a total of 6 minutes on TV, a total of 6 minutes. And with these 6 minutes, they were supposed to convince people that live for years in a propaganda machine. So when the EU will decide to change its stance and to become from a bureaucratic body that says, oh, that specific point of your law doesn't work, to a political body that is able to look in the eye of well, these people, then we might be successful, because the problem is the system that is built. It's not the single law. I would also add, and then I'm gonna give the word back to you, that I think that this is something that the conservative parties in Europe really need to face. So what we have seen in the, if you look at the elections in the past 2 months, you have Italy with a very, very far-right party winning, who has been junior coalition partners of the center-right governments in the past 20 years. If you look at Sweden, the government is alive because a very far-right party is supporting them, and the same in Hungary, the same in Bulgaria. So what does it mean? It means that the conservatives in the EU, the way I look at it, are responsible for having this little, at the beginning, little coalition friend who's far right, but bringing them in power, they legitimize the fact that far right parties become powerful. And so all of a sudden, it's easier for the people who look at this party to normalize them, instead of saying, hey, no, these people stand against democracy. So I think this is a problem that the EU needs to face and to become more political about it, but also that conservatives around the EU needs to really look into what they're doing and understand that power at all costs means enabling the far right. And this has already happened. So either they decide to stop it, or we're going to be in big troubles.
Many thanks, Francesca, for your complete answer. So my second question focuses more on migration. It concerns the ocean-breaking diplomatic scandal between France and Italy. The French government criticized the unacceptable behavior of its neighbor, while Italy Prime Minister Meloni denounces the aggressive behavior of France. What do you think about this scandal, and more generally on the migration and asylum management by the EU and its member states within the famous Dublin mechanism?
Yeah, so I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think that, again, the underlying issue with migration is that there is no real common policy. The way it is structured now, all the pressure is with the countries that live at the border. So the first who receive the migrants, the refugees, etc. This means that this can be very easily weaponized. And this is what is happening. It's happening in Greece, it has happened in Italy, it has happened in Spain, in a variety of countries. So what I would like to see is a real common migration policy where the distribution is shared for real. That would enable, first off, to have, again, for this topic not to be constantly weaponized, because in the end, this means that the price is paid by the people who are coming to the EU and who are trying to find a new home here. The second point is, reform that with clear rulers, clearer rules, clear responsibilities, and shared responsibility, but also the system that I mentioned before. So we have the European, Frontex, the European system patrolling our coasts, who has been found, documented, guilty of human rights violations that are unspeakable. So honestly, instead of talking of 300 people, or I don't know how many they were on the boat that arrived to Italy, I would be more concerned in understanding what is happening with the Coast Guard in the EU. Last point that I would like to make is, again, a point of structure. The way it works now, the migration system, it leaves a lot of space to single countries, right? So Italy has renewed recently their agreements with the Libyan Coast Guards, but there's no Libyan Coast Guard. There are a bunch of terrorists exploiting and killing people. And this is happening because a European country is enabling them to do this. So in the impossible collaboration with the European member states, because everybody's pushing the ball their own direction, what happens is that we keep on financing terrorists to imprison and torture people. I don't know how we can be, how do we think we're going to solve this, you know, if we don't really step up our game when it comes to this. I hope I've replied. This really passions me. So sometimes I go a bit out of my way, because I feel this is one of the issues that is really at the core of this union. I was mentioning before that I don't believe the EU should be like America's Trump, you know, so European first. No, I think the EU is important as a place to welcome everybody and to flourish the potential of everybody.
Many thanks for your answers, Francesca, and I leave the floor to Adam.
Very good. I hope you you enjoyed those two questions, which are on you know, topics that I know are very important to Volt Europa. For the last question, I would like to know: is there a question that you're never asked in interviews, and that you hope that sometimes, you know, you would have the opportunity to speak about? And so, you know, I'm wondering, because we're quite an informal space, whether there is such a topic that you think would deserve to be covered more in interviews, that can have to do, for instance, with maternity. That's a topic that, you know, we don't necessarily speak about in an environment that's dominated by men. You know.
This is a beautiful question. I wish you had asked me this offline so I would have time to prepare it, because this is actually a genius question and I don't have a reply on top of my mind. I can tell you though what is that I'm passionate about and that I usually enjoy discussing. It's fun that you mentioned maternity, because of course it goes a bit in that direction. So okay, when you say maternity, the point is that it becomes immediately a topic of woman, which is, I mean, fair enough and important. But the way I look at it is that there is a very deep connection between economic power, or anyway, the way the economy is built, and social equality. So the matter of gender equality, for example, when you look into it in depth and in depth, is really a matter of economic power. When we talk about maternity, the point is that in a lot of countries, it's still something that is just bound to the woman. And of course, fair enough, if the woman is the person who gives birth usually, but it's not the only parent. So the systems that have proven more successful are those where there's not only maternity leave, but there's parental leave. So you can choose who takes the leave, and the system encourages that kind of behavior. I've been researching on this a lot because of what I told you. And really, this is a question of how the economic system is built, but also how the culture receives this kind of changes. So there are systems in which, for example, the parental leave is equal between parents, but the cultures do it so that men don't ask for paternal leave because it's looked down. This is the case. I remember the case, for example, I know that in Korea is like that. I don't remember any EU state, but I know that in Korea is like that. So this is valid for maternity, but it's valid for a variety of topics. It's valid for disability rights. Ultimately, it's about the kind of job that you're gonna name, the kind of economic power that you're gonna name, It's true for people in the LGBTIQ plus community. It's true for ethnic minorities, for migrants. It's true for all of this. So the thing that passionates me the most is the silver line between social equality, meaning the rights of expressing oneself, of achieving, of having a good life or a free life or whatever you want, and how much this is linked to the economic system. So yeah, I find that in the end, this is the real question that matters. If you enable economic power for people, the part of civil rights immediately advances.
Thank you very much, Francesca Romana, for accepting this interview. This interview can be found on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and on Instagram. Volt Europa is also findable online. You're a very digital and tech-savvy political party, obviously also to be found in the elections. And I wish for those who listened to this interview to Google and get interested in the party and in what they're doing. I will close this interview with a final word. Today marks the anniversary of a terrorist attack in Paris on the 13th of November 2015. Whilst at Open Borders Institute, we are an advocacy that is focused primarily on spreading a positive message about openness. The terrorist attack in Paris reminds us that tolerance is a creed to fight for. So we send a message of support to those everywhere who fight against terror, oppression, obscurantism, religious fanaticism, and who strive and stand for their freedom of conscience and freedom of expression. We believe that our struggle for liberty knows no borders, and I think that Volt Europa seems to have a perception of certain European ideals as not stopping to the borders of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Adam. Beautiful final message. I love it.